And welcome everyone to this launch of Handshake, an interactive robotic installation by AATB. My name is Alex. I am in charge of the Arts Plus programming at Swiss Next Boston, and I get to introduce you to this project today and to the launch today. As COVID-19 has escalated, there have been quite some talks about the potential role that robots and robotics can play in managing the public health crisis. They have been deployed to disinfect contaminated infrastructure. They can be helpful in safely delivering medications and food. And they can also help to measure vital signs or, help manage border controls. But you all today are joining from all around the world. A lot of you have now slowly been witnessing the reemergence of your public and social lives after this really strange and difficult time of isolation during COVID-19. And while right here and now, we're totally enjoying this nice side effect of being able to launch an online event with an online audience all around the world, online at the same time, this time has been really hard for a lot of us, and it's been really challenging. And from the people in Switzerland that I've been speaking to in the past couple of days, and for our other audiences, Switzerland has slowly been reopening and is a little bit farther along than the East Coast and the US at this point. I hear that the joy that people are feeling when they're able to see and touch their friends and family, their colleagues and their collaborators, again, after such a long period of isolation and physical distance, that touch and that human connection is, of course, what we miss most. So when we're considering the potential of the collaboration between robots and humans in managing this crisis, this core question arises, and namely, can robotics help us overcome this biggest challenge of living in isolation and physical distance, the human touch? And as so often in life, or at least in my life, art and design have an enormous potential to help us crystallize out some of the core questions and issues arising from a crisis. And so it is today my great joy to launch this online installation that we have been working on over the past weeks and months with AATB. This project itself is actually the result of limitations set through this pandemic. Together with the Swiss Consulate in New York and the Swiss Federal Office of Culture, we were supposed to be working towards a physical exhibition in New York this spring. But with travel plans and physical gatherings becoming impossible, we put our heads together to come up with a plan B and see how together we could bring up a relevant conversation through an online format. Andrea, Thibault, I could not have imagined a more fulfilling and relevant plan B to be working on. At Swiss Next Boston, we've always been dedicated to bridging the Atlantic in science, technology, and innovation, but I would never have thought that we would be bridging the Atlantic with the actual touch. So thank you so much for that. I'd also like to thank Swiss Next San Francisco, Present Switzerland, Pro Helvetia, and Wanted Design New York for all of your generous support and collaboration for this project. A big shout out also goes to the whole Swiss Next network around the world, over which we were able to access audiences all around. And of course, a huge thank you goes to all the teams behind these names for all your tireless efforts to produce, organize, and communicate this project. And last, but definitely not least, and only to build up suspense, a huge thank you to our core collaborators on this project, the Consulate General of Switzerland in New York and the Swiss Federal Office of Culture. Thank you so much for embarking on this experiment with us. Matthias Dettling, Elena Benninger, and Anna Niederhäuser, it has been a pleasure working with you as always. Matthias Dettling, you have joined us today. Could you take over for a few minutes?
Thank you, Alexandra, and hi, everyone. Like my colleague at Swiss Next Boston, we at the Swiss Consulate here in New York, we're extremely delighted to support this project, Handshake, which has come together on such a short notice and as a response to COVID-19. I would also like to extend our thanks to all partners involved, and especially to Anna and Thibault of AATB for working on this project non-stop over the last few weeks. We are so proud to be part of this incredibly innovative virtual installation. Thank you all for participating. Back to you, Alexandra.
Thank you, Matthias. It's now my pleasure to introduce our moderator and interviewer for this evening, Roddy Schrock. Roddy is a curator and arts executive based in Brooklyn, New York. Since 2015, Roddy has been the executive director of Eyebeam in New York City, an institution dedicated to supporting art that engages technology. There, he manages the organization's direct artist support and guides its focus in supporting work that aims to realign societal relationships to emergent technologies. He has been an active practitioner of digital and sound art himself, living and working on 3 continents. He received an MFA from Mills College and a certificate in nonprofit management from Harvard University. His essays have been published at MIT Press, and he writes regularly for online publications such as Hyperallergetic or Huffington Post. As a sound artist, Schrock has been commissioned by Meet the Composer, the American Music Center, the Netherlands America Foundation, and the Ostrava New Music Days, amongst others. He currently teaches in the curatorial practice MA program at the School of Visual Arts and has taught at the Studio for Electro-Instrumental Music, California College of the Arts, and New York University's Interactive Telecommunications program. He sits on the Netherlands America Foundation Cultural Committee, and he is a founding board member of Art and Feminism. Welcome, Roddy, and thank you so much for leading us through this conversation with AATB.
Alex, thank you so much. I couldn't be happier to be part of the conversation today and to have this chance to get to know Andrea and Thibault better, and really appreciate your invitation to help make today a special moment for all of us. If we could, why don't we kick things off with the handshake itself? And while we're presented with that, I can do a introduction of Andrea and Thibault. So with this in the background, and to build up suspense for further discussion, I will just introduce Andrea and Thibault via their bio. In 2018, Andrea Honor and Thibault Brevet started a collaborative practice together. Andrea was born in Zurich and graduated from the Zurich University of the Arts in 2008 with a BA in Visual Communication, and in 2012 from ECAL in Lausanne with a MA in Art Direction, Type Design. Since 2014, she has been collaborating with Martina Perrin as Anna Perrin, a studio for art direction. Thibault Brevet was born in Lyon and graduated from ECAL in 2012 with a BA in graphic design, and in 2015 with a MA in visual arts. He has been developing a practice at the intersection of art, engineering, and design, and has been programming websites since 2012. Their joint practice as AATB has developed around the idea of non-industrial robotics. They started experimenting with industrial robotics systems such as robotic arms and industrial automation processes. Together, they developed works exploring human-machine interactions through the lens of kinetic and interactive devices. The studio is currently in residence at Atelier Luma in Arles. AATB have been nominated for the Swiss Design Awards of 2020. So I think that there's a lot of information contained in the visual that sort of sits behind us virtually at the moment, but there's a lot of information that's not contained as well. What we're seeing is Handshake in operation in real time in their studio, both behind them on their Zoom camera and in the presentation with the same image. And Andrea and Thibault, could I ask you to share a little bit about what we're seeing at this time?
So essentially, what you're seeing right now is 2 gigantic hands that are held by 2 robotic arms. And both of these are controlled in real time through a web platform. And so what you see on the left is the actual website. Anybody around the world can go right now on this website and register, get in line, and take over one of the hands. And for about a minute, they will be able to experience and control very smoothly the hand and have a very fleeting moment of interaction through this digital platform, but that actually exists physically behind us. So just gonna make a tiny move to show you that it's so connected, and I'm in here now. So it's in real time. It's not fake. So yeah, I think yeah, we can probably go further on afterwards. But this project is really about topics that we've been exploring for a very long time, and we used to work on a much more low-tech level, let's say, about 10 years ago when we started working together. But increasingly, we have been working with more and more complex systems up till being able to do this kind of stuff. So yeah, that's Handshake.
Well, I mean, again, congratulations on successfully realizing this project and bringing it to fruition in such a short amount of time and on so little sleep. I happened to first see this project when it was actually living in your apartment when we spoke, I think it was last week or so. And there was a level of just resonance with our contemporary moment that felt so dynamic and real. Even just seeing it in that kind of early stage, and now seeing it in operation in this very finished way, it continues and only grows in a kind of eloquent sort of resonance with the current situation, but with a real sense of playfulness as well, which I'd love to dive into a little perhaps later. In the meantime, one of the things that really struck me about your work was your insistence on describing it as being outside of corporate robotics, government robotics, or largely specific government entity funded robotics as well. And that was very curious to me. After we spoke more, it was enlightening to learn how you came to that designation for your work. Could you talk a little bit about what the state of robotics in terms of independent practice is in relationship to the way robotics is seen in the larger context of the media and so forth?
Yeah, I guess we are really working with industrial robotic arms, but as we kind of have started with a very low level, like building our own machines, we kind of really yeah, I guess we approach the robots in a very kind of direct manner, and we are not afraid of kind of like to approach them as like the machines that we have started to build ourselves. And as our practice has really evolved over the last years, and the machines we were building ourselves got more and more complex, they really yeah, we are really kind of like liking this low tech and high tech, this whole, you know.
Yeah, and I think we came to exist in this way of working in robotics because I mean, in the beginning we didn't think it would be possible to even work with robotics at all. Like we were strictly limited to the tool set of being students in a flat chair with a shelf where you can store a little bit of material. But then as time goes and as you can work more and have access to bigger facilities, the things you can have also around you to work, that grew a little bit, and we got the chance to buy a second-hand robot for extremely cheap about 4 years ago. And that was a complete leap of faith, because we literally thought there was a 50% chance we just bought half a ton of metal that would be sitting useless in our studio, that we would not be able to figure out what to do out of it. Then, like, in the end, we realized that by digging into it, like the knowledge is out there, it's just very well hidden. And so you just end up learning on YouTube and on Google, downloading PDFs, lurking in forums, and then discovering how these things work, but are actually most often limited to, I'm not going to say a technical elite, because these machines are normally restricted to academic environments or like big corporation research labs. And people having access to these machines often don't have the freedom to basically fool around with these and experiment in a much more creative manner that we managed to allow ourselves to do.
I guess this gives us a lot of freedom, that we are not working for a university, or not working for research, or not working for a company. AATB has really started as kind of like a playground for ourselves, as we both have kind of practices ourselves beside that we are both working independently next to AATB, and we're not really depending on, at least at the beginning, making money with our practice. I guess that gave us a lot of freedom to really fool around and try things where others working for research never would have dared to, or never would have never thought about to do so.
And one of the beautiful things about your practice as well is the fact that you have been able to take this incredibly technically challenging and incredibly restricted in many ways kind of world of practice around robotics, and through a very artist-driven approach, and as you mentioned the other day, working with art, very kind of DIY electronics basically in the early days, and then just over time sort of collecting knowledge from these very specific fields into a practice that can then realize projects like this, I think is a very unique trajectory, and one that seems to speak to the way artists often kind of approach this type of practice, but in a highly successful way. And I was thinking about one of your earlier works that came to the fore in conversation the other day, Grand Central, which was in some ways perhaps a precursor to the current project, in the sense that it involved online interaction as well as electronics, but maybe at a lower level of sophistication, or maybe not. I'm not sure. I don't really know that much about technology, to be perfectly honest. But it still was very much, it seems to me to be within the lineage of what you're doing today. Could you talk a little bit about Grand Central, and perhaps how that acted as a step to where you are now?
Yeah, so Brevet Central was started at my graduation project during my bachelor studies. And at this time, we were already working together with Andrea, and that became a bit one of the first projects we really worked heavily on together. And I think it was a bit a moment where it crystallized all the fooling around we were doing during our 3 years of studies, where we tried to merge everything what we were interested in. So there was the physical aspect of building your own tool, so building your own printer, understanding every single nook and cranny of every single tiny electronic component, to every single line of code, to every single mechanical part. So there was also really something about reappropriating and reclaiming technology, not wanting to depend on existing software platform, existing I don't know, desktop inkjet printers or this kind of stuff. There was a will to deliberately step aside of the existing industry or infrastructure available. And also there was another component that was really about like online communities, and how to make this more tangible as an experience, to really visualize or experience this. And sorry. And so basically, it goes back to a long time. Like even before this project, we were already working on plugging things online. Like when it was still hard to do, like you didn't have talks about IoT, Internet of Things was still not the hot topic. And so it was a very niche thing to try to plug things online and have these sort of devices that respond to a digital activity online in a physical realm. And I think this project was, for us, it's quite funny, because after almost 10 years of having done it, like this takes another shape, but fundamentally for us, it's the same project. Like we have a web platform, people getting online, and having a physical experience where it all comes together somewhere. So Grand Central was about collecting messages and thoughts of people and printing them out through this huge printer. And then you had a physical artifact of all this conversation that used to be distributed all around the world. And here it's more fleeting because we don't archive really. It's just this performance. It's just a moment that happens. But yeah, like I think it's for us. It's a continuation between this project for sure.
And it's so interesting too, the way that artists were in so many ways some of the earliest people that I heard really recognizing the kind of collapse between the digital and the physical, and sort of helping understand that in time that kind of separation between those worlds will just be less and less and less. And I think that's clearly seen really beautifully in the work that you all are doing. And it also calls to mind your project, Sunny Side Up, which in a very different way is about kind of connecting intangibles with tangibles through an installation that mimics the way that the sun circles the earth, but through a lamp that could exist far underground and would give a sense of connection to a world that one wouldn't have otherwise. Do you see that kind of practice as being sort of a through line in much of what you do?
Yeah, I guess we have, I guess in Sunny Side Up, what was interesting for us in this project was really kind of like having to kind of like try to establish a connection with the universe in a way. It's really about us and the sun, and it's really like by having this, like the robot moves light as if the sun would move the light along the day. So basically it's really kind of like through this robotic installation, you really kind of like you reconnect to a greater feeling somehow.
And I think also the Sunny Side Up or Grand Central or Handshake, they all also have I think like something behind that we are exploring with AATB is that it's a bit like we are doubtful optimists about technology, and essentially we are questioning like, okay, what if you could reconnect with nature through a robot, but doing it a bit in a skeptical way, but because we don't want to just ask the question, we want to actually experience it. So we build it, and then we see for ourselves, and not just reading online like, ooh, robots are bad, ooh, you should not trust technology. Like for us, it's more about being skeptical, but at the same time trying to see what actually is behind this. So that's also why we try to engage really closely with high-end technologies. It's not about being fascinated or fetishizing the technology for itself. It's more about like really say, okay, like we know how to use this, we know how to build these ideas, so let's just build them and see what's behind it. So yeah, like what happened, like a robotic touch, like can you really experience something out of it? And so we were wondering like, well, maybe it's just like bland and you don't feel anything on screen, but I don't know, at least for ourselves, now that we've been trying it and looking at it, and we got it to a point where we really feel like you can feel something, like you can feel the texture, you can feel the motion, you can feel the like right now I'm staring at, you can look at it behind me. This is two person, like one in New York and another in Sebastopol right now, just playing around, and it just works. And so I think all these projects are a bit about this, like a bit about stepping a little bit forward, exploring technologies.
But yeah, really working with technology, but like using technology, but at the same time, like trying to hide it as much as possible. Like in a way, if the robots could be invisible, we would love to have invisible robots, but like still working with robots. But it's really like kind of like, yeah, I think that's a bit what we try to achieve in our work. It's like working with robots, but having them as invisible as possible.
Yeah, it's a little bit like, rather than, you know, taking the utopic route or taking this dystopic route, you're finding, I like how you described it as a doubtful optimism, which feels like a bit of a middle path between those two realms, which any optimism at this point is very welcome. So thank you. Could you talk a little bit about the role of play in your work? Because there is very much that element in what you do, and maybe how that kind of reveals some of these larger themes that you're talking about. And I don't know if that also relates to your project Soap Opera as well, or just in general. I would love to hear more about just the idea of play as a component of sort of revealing these larger, very serious concerns in many ways.
Yeah, I guess we could say from our work that we try to be as we try to be playful in our work, and I think we are. I mean, I guess, or at least I hope that you can see this, but I think when we try to have fun and when we try to fool around, then that's when we have like nice ideas, or when we feel that something is working. And yeah, regarding to Soap Opera, which was a project that we have been working on for the DNA Museum, it was basically an installation of a robot that would blow soap bubbles all day long. It was really this kind of like very like tentative installation where you could basically, people would look at it for half an hour or hour, just like this robot making bubbles and different forms of bubbles. And I think for us it was really kind of like the robot becomes this very nice object to look at, but at the same time for us it had a much deeper meaning as well, this project. Basically, when we did some research about this project, we found out that in the Dutch paintings, there was always in the paintings of the 16th century, in these vanitas paintings, that there were always little children blowing soap bubbles, and the soap bubbles were actually kind of an image for the fragility of life. So basically the soap bubble is something that exists, but then a second later it pops and it's gone. So it becomes this very nice image for something that is not forever. So I think this is also something that has it is in a way a playful project, but it also, this project, it kind of like evokes questions that we are concerned about.
Yeah, and I think
could you display images of that piece, perhaps? I think that would be so interesting to see, of Soap Opera in particular. I think that it would just be great for people to see that.
While Andrea gets the slide, I want to expand a bit on this idea of play, because we define often our projects in a lot of what we do as Trojan horses, because for us, like the playfulness is the Trojan horse. So it's a way to enter into, to enter somehow behind skeptical people who might be too afraid to engage in some works because just of the fact that, oh, it's robot, I don't really want to, I'm not interested. But we'd like to somehow wrap it a bit in this sort of playfulness on the top, so that it makes it easier to enter the work because it's a bit more light. But behind it, you have a lot of these heavy topics. And in our practice, that's a bit what we often enjoy, is talking about deep and heavy problems, but through some very light ways. So it's making it more digestible in a way for the public. And so we are doing niche work in a way, but at the same time, we try to make it very open to anybody. And so our approach is maybe that that's maybe where the designer in us takes over the artist. It's where we try to be very communicative and to bring as much as possible of the public with us, and not make elite projects or working with aesthetics that might put out a lot of people. We try to just make it as a nice experience, so you can come and just have something and you can leave, or you can come, have something, and also stay, and 2 hours we can talk together about a lot of what's behind. And that's the bubbles, that's all these projects are on the first impression are very exciting, very like bites to enjoy, but then they develop much farther.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I think it's really great to see that actually the video. I hope that it gives everyone a better sense of what is being described. And I think that question of designers that are really, you know, trying to take on bigger issues through a form of playfulness is there's certainly a lineage of practice that, you know, is influencing so many people today. Could you talk a little bit perhaps of people that you found particularly inspirational in terms of helping you think through your approach to design and art as a means of raising awareness around bigger issues through this kind of approach?
Yeah, like probably like some of the major artist groups that influenced us when we were studying was like the FAT group, like the FAT art, free art and technology. That was quite influential for us, like all the crew, Theo Watson and Aram Barthol, and all these people working around like technology and the impact that it has on society, and how almost as a hacker can be more relevant than an artist sometimes, or this sort of approach that suddenly gave us confidence, because as a student we were a bit like when you start to work with electronics and you are in a very, very niche, it's hard to build up confidence that your work can be meaningful and can expand outside. And also the Institute for Applied Autonomy, that was a bit more old. These were really like topics, but really like suddenly we realized, wow, there is a whole scene of artists that work with technology and that are as much engineers as artists, and it's fine. And it's not like you have to be either or. And I guess when you're young and you don't really know all this kind of niche art scenes, that was really open, like eye openers for us to discover these people. So I think like right now in robotics, like it's growing also, but it's still, for us, it's still amazing to now, having been running the studio for a couple of years, and we have met a lot of people in a lot of places, and it still feels like the scene is extremely tiny, and so it's quite interesting when we discover other people working around robotics, but in this, like what we qualified as non-industrial robotics, because we were just out of terms to qualify it. We are always very excited because it feels like there's a very tiny community, but it's just very spread out and not very, it's very fragmented also and very undocumented in a way. So sometimes we just discover some other people, and we were like wondering how we didn't like meet all this time. So
yeah. And where do you see, and I think that's, again, so fascinating, and I hope that today's program and all of the work that you're doing really helps bring awareness around this particular type of practice. It's certainly one that's dear to my heart. And I wonder if you have a sense of some of the kind of, restrictions perhaps that you're kind of laying out in terms of the ability to connect with each other and to have kind of a better documentation of this type of practice. Do you have the sense that that is shifting to some degree, or is it becoming a bit more well known in the broader sort of design or art worlds? And I would just love to hear your thoughts on that.
I think like it's bound to become more and more common, for a simple fact. It's just that robotics technologies are becoming cheaper and cheaper and more accessible. So you have more and more people that pick it up, and it's a bit like coming out of this sort of technical elite, as I was mentioning before. And right now it's such a tiny niche because it's still at a stage where you can't just like buy a robot as you buy a drone or a 3D printer or these kind of things that have arrived in the last decade maybe, and really created new practices. I think it's more the technology is becoming more interesting, and probably one big driver that we didn't really talk about right now before is the fact that there is a shift in robotics and in industrial robotics called collaborative robotics. And this is what you see behind. These types of robots are called collaborative robots. And what does it mean is that if I go and I somehow it bumps into me, it's not dangerous. It's not meant to do that, but it's going to stop. So I don't need to fence it. I don't need a cage, and somehow we can work a lot with this type of robots with students to do workshops. We can bring them around. We can safely try to experiment with them. And previous technologies of robots that were not collaborative, so they were inherently unsafe, and they were inherently meant to be not in the same space as humans. So that limited enormously what you could do with them in terms of scenography, in terms of performance, in terms of basically everything that we as artists want to do is like putting it in a space and trying to do things like you were basically risking killing the public. So that kind of goes against the idea of just experimenting without really a clear idea of what you want to achieve. So these robots really allow this, and I think that now that these are becoming more and more common, we will see more and more projects appearing because they are becoming more common in art schools, in design schools, but also outside of these places. And the price is also going down, so I think that's right now, that's the major limit, is that the price makes them still hard to approach, or you need to like spend hours on Craigslist, which is a very good place also to snatch robots, surprisingly.
Which is, I mean, surprising and unsurprising. Craigslist is such an incredible resource for so many people who are, looking for unlikely materials. And I also wanted to just remind people that we do have the opportunity to ask questions. And I believe the chat box is the preferred means by which you can do so. So if there are questions for Andrea and Thibault, this would be a great moment. I think we're getting down to the last few minutes here. Perhaps while we allow that to happen, Andrea and Thibault, oh, actually, we do have a question that just came in. Someone is asking, the interface between the output and the machine in some cases seems proprietary in your work. Are you also creating the interfaces that interact with the machines? Has that been difficult?
Yes, we are programming every single thing we do, which is a huge pain, but also the reason why we can do what we want to do. Working with robotics and industrial systems in general is very complicated because it's really meant for B2B. It's not meant for end users. It's not really open. It's meant to, like, the normal use case for having a robot like this is that the support contract that you will pay annually will be as much as the robot itself, just because you need to have a guy that can come up in an hour to fix it. Otherwise, your factory is down. So these types of machines are not meant for people like us, and the way they are meant to work and the systems to support and maintain them, like if something breaks down, like it's just like not for us. So that's where it can get tricky sometimes, but that's also where we see a lot of opportunities to just step away again, like, because it's not that complicated to step away of the intended use cases. In a way, like if that can be maybe inspiring to people who have a bit of electronics knowledge who are here. Robot controllers are just big Arduinos. They are literally just big Arduinos. You can program them and you can plug anything you want into them. And it's some of the proprietary system is not that proprietary actually. Like you can program them in a very, like every brand has their own computer language, but basically it's all documented and open, and you can just download the reference and then you can start programming them. So you won't be able to work from one robot brand to another robot brand, that won't be easy to just like load it into another system, but it's very easy to customize them actually. Like once you're past the initial hurdle of not it's not a Mac, let's say. It's not it's a bit more, it's being back a bit in the 90s. Like you have to go in the terminal, you have to learn a bit of command line, you have to learn electronics, and it's a bit more lower level, but it's very it's actually surprisingly modular and flexible. And for us, that's also why when we realized this, like, oh, it's just an Arduino, and that clicked. And that's also why we realized, wow, okay, we actually can do all these things we were doing before, but just bigger. And yeah, it's really interesting.
And for those that don't know, I get just to quickly let people understand maybe a bit more. The Arduino was an early device that allowed for an open source approach to essentially mechanical interface, correct? And it was developed with a very kind of open source, public domain ethos that allowed a lot of people to be introduced to mechanics through digital interface. Does that sound correct to y'all?
Yeah. And I think like you can almost say that our Arduino triggered a lot of the revolution we've seen with like 3D printers and drones and essentially all the technologies that you see, a lot of the technologies you see now that also became extremely cheap because of smartphones. Arduino piggybacked on that and created a platform where you can just like build like insanely complex systems, but entirely yourself and really easily. And the community and the knowledge online is gigantic. You can just Google anything you want and you will find someone that wanted to do the same before and explained how to do it. And so it's also very interesting. Like the way we work is extremely based on the community. Like every single thing we have to solve, we've never done it. We've never learned it in school. We just like figured out, okay, we want to connect these two hands online. Like, but like, how do you do that? Like 2 months ago, we had no clue.
But I guess that's something that is really important in a way also in our practice. Basically, I mean, we have both studied graphic design, and basically everything we do now, we have never ever learned at school. So basically really being able to go on the internet and find it. Yeah, that's basically what defines our practice today. So basically, and I'm always, I mean, Thibault is a bit more the technical guy, but so I'm always surprised what he finds and how he finds a solution to every problem. But in a way, the internet has a solution to every problem. You just need to dig a bit deeper or spend nights and days on the internet. But that's really what basically everything we know today and everything we do today, we have learned
on YouTube
or on weird PDFs, on documentations. But that's also what we try to teach. I mean, we engage a lot in teaching and give workshops, and also a lot with these like collaborative robots, as they're so easy to use, but also we teach a lot with Arduino and programming. So it's always super nice to see, like, basically at the beginning on Monday morning of a workshop, we learn to blink an LED, and then like at the end of the week we have a nice little project with an object that can have basically we make objects that have inputs and outputs, and basically we do robotic systems with the students, and it's always so nice to see that. In a way, it's like even with such a project, we have it's quite complex, but as if you break it down to a lot of small little problems, can kind of like solve huge projects. So
well, I think we have some very well-versed attendees in the audience today. Here's one of the questions that I bet you all, well, maybe not, but it seems like it could be a challenge that you face in this project in particular. So you may have spent some time researching it. Are you bothered / hindered by the distance between programming in code versus the 3D characteristics, including axes, time is 4D actually of the output of the robotic arms.
So what is the beginning of the question? Like, what are we related to this? Like, are we?
I think what the gist of the question is are you challenged by the distance between programming and code versus the kind of three-dimensional access?
Sorry.
Sorry?
Like, I think like for us it's more an enabler. Like for us the robot is just a way of being able to, on top of being able to program electronics and being able to use sensors and plug things to like websites, like the robot is allowing us to add through the programming elements like the motion of things in space and time. And so it's fundamentally linked and intertwined, like because through the lines of code that goes like, oh, ask the server to do this, go read some database to see if someone left a message. And also, by the way, send the robot to this place in space. And then if you're not sure, go to the other side. It's completely integrated. And for us, that's also probably the major thing that we had to integrate in our practice is we can make everything move everywhere we want and how we want it and how long, and be absolutely precise in the way we want to do it. So we do a lot of projects that explore more performative qualities of the robots, but we also do a lot of research around fabrication processes or more like manufacturing processes in collaboration or just ourselves for like graphic design output sometimes. Or so it can be everything. Like the robot can be a printer as much as it can be big hands, or it can be a sundial. It's just like whatever you put at the end and whatever code you load into it, and it just becomes something else. So that's really, for us, the power of it is we don't have to build new machines every time. The robot becomes a new machine every time.
Mm-hmm. And another question that came in is, have you thought of how to add haptics?
So I guess what we mean by that is some sort of feedback for like feeling something.
That's what I heard it as, was more, I guess, or I guess it could be on that side as well. Maybe there's a haptics of, but perhaps you running through the fingers was a form of haptics also.
Yeah, well, the thing is, once you start to build things yourself, the sky is the limit, because the only limit is like time and money, and it just depends how complex or simple you want to do it. We are very interested right now to further our research with robotics to add 3D scanning components and real-time 3D scanning component, meaning that at the end of the robot has some 3D scanning device, and so it's able to know what is in front of itself, and it's able to like move around things that it's able to detect or play around, or it's just that we are at a stage also where we are hitting some limit on we would need to have a PhD in robotics for some things we want to do, and some other things we can do ourselves. And we are a bit at this stage where we have to decide if we want to spend 3 years doing some projects that are just like way over our head, or in some other ways we are also very comfortable doing more creative projects that don't involve like heavy R&D, because it's the pro and cons. Like the pro of being an independent studio, having robots and fooling around, is we can do really, really funny things just for the sake of it, because we have the machines in the studio, we have all the equipment to build everything ourselves. We learned over the years, not just programming, but like CNC machining, welding, like everything that revolves around the robot. Maybe that's also something that is crucial actually to being able to use the robots is understanding everything that comes around. Like if you have just a robot, it's not going to be very useful if you are not able to customize it to do whatever you want. So you need to also know some sort of mechanical engineering, you need to know some sort of electrical engineering, and so you need a lot of different skill sets. You don't need much of each, but you need a bit of all of them. And so our question now is more, how far do we want to push this skill set, and how much are we able to handle, because it's just like, I mean, we are not and we don't want to be a research institute because we are not 50 employees with 15 PhDs working for us. So that's the limit for us.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you know, and I think we have maybe about 5 to 7 minutes left, and you know, that kind of like leads me perhaps to what could be one of our closing questions, which is, what do you see as the I'm trying to think how to phrase this. Maybe one way of putting it would be, if you had infinite resources and infinite time, where would you take your practice next? And working back from that, in reality, what do you plan to do next?
I think
The infinite time resources one first, please.
It's if we knew, that would be great. I think, like, where do we want to take the next project?
Wherever we take on offers.
All right, yeah. The last couple of years have been more in a model where we are answering requests, and we've been in transition because we were based previously in Berlin, and now we are mostly based in the south of France. And this transition has been extremely time-consuming. We had very little time to really do self-initiated projects. And so that's, we are entering, like today, essentially, we are opening up for the first time our new studio we were renovating it for like months. And so the great thing about today is that for us, it's a bit a new beginning for the studio, because this space is the new space where we can finally experiment much further on our research. But yeah, I don't know, like probably it's gonna first start with having more robots and then we will see.
I love the image of just a studio full of robots. One more question that came in, which I thought was quite good, is what's the role of collaboration in your practice? It feels like with your approach, you can really bring breakthroughs to other disciplines and fields of thought. Your practice is truly transdisciplinary in that sense. So what's the role of collaboration? How do you propel forward with that kind of approach?
Yeah, I guess we love to collaborate. I think, like, I mean, we have been collaborating between each other for the last 10 years. I mean, we have officially founded AATB only 2 years ago or 3 years ago, but have been collaborating for 10 years. And now in the last months, we have kind of had the chance to grow our team. And like in the last weeks, we had even more people. And I think with every new person brings in a new, brings in new qualities, and I think that's what is super important to us. And I think we really try to have a nice time together, even though we are working, and I guess that's super important to us too.
Yeah, I think also, like, it's just what we do is just like we basically invented our own practice. So the way we work is really our own way of working, and we're not pretending that we work in a right way. It's just for us, that's how it works. And so confronting our practice to the practice of someone else is usually very, very stimulating, because we can really work in a different manner or learn. It's always about learning, I think, and confronting perspectives, and often, yeah, like collaborations bring on like very interesting projects. Yeah, I think we like to collaborate very often also. It's just like yeah, if we could have more time in general, like if days would be 48 hours, that'd be great. Yeah, that's how it is. We are time limited. So.
Right. Well, I think that's a really nice way to sort of, you know, start closing here. And I have to say that I agree very much with the comment / question that the work that you're doing really is transdisciplinary in a very holistic and organic way that feels to me very singular. and its potential to really break through to other disciplines is something that also feels really apparent. And I just, again, am really appreciative of you sharing what you're doing with us today in this kind of intimate setting. And unless there are further questions from the audience, I think we've covered a lot of ground today, and we've learned, I've learned even more about your work, and I find that to be really gratifying. And I hope that's true for everyone that participated today. And I just want to say again how grateful I am to have been invited to be part of this conversation. And Andrea and Thibault, I hope you have great success in everything that you're doing going forward. And I hope everyone in attendance is safe and well, and that we can just continue to appreciate and enjoy your work going forward. And I think with that, we could adjourn for the evening. So thank you again, Alex and SwissNext.
Thank you so much, Roddy. Thank you, Andrea and Thibault, for sharing your insight to your work today. I just wanted to mention that the installation will be running through the 30th of June. So under the link that we posted earlier, you can interact with the robots anytime until then. And we do have a series of events and podcasts scheduled to be coming out around the topic of design and robotics in that time span. So keep your eyes peeled online. We will be communicating the panel for our next event on June 11th in the next few days. Also, we have some cool events coming up on patient advocacy and the Swiss-US Energy Innovation Days next week. So if those are topics that interest you, please consult our website on that as well. And thank you all for stopping by to share your thoughts with us today. And everyone have fun interacting with the robots and stay safe.